Americans are notorious for their patriotism. Culturally, Americans are more willing to die and hold a higher regard towards their country than almost any other industrialized nation. In these measures, Americans are more like Serbia and Nigeria than Germany or the UK. It turns out, Americans have held an exceptional view of their country since 1776, and even before. It is perhaps best exemplified by American foreign diplomacy, where centuries of conquest and dominance have defined the modern era we are in. The Revolutionary War started as a consequence of many complicated geopolitical actions and relationships, but one such act was the Proclamation Line, a boundary set across the Appalachian Mountains and stretching southward that barred the 13 colonies from moving westwards in order to prevent skirmishes with the natives. This was a major source of contention between the British and soon-to-be Americans, who would regularly violate this line, for example, with the Scots settling the Appalachians en masse well before the war. This decision was made, in part, to stunt the colonies' growth, a source of oppression that would grow across various cultures of the colonies. The Revolutionary War ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, and this treaty brought hefty demands from the new nation. Not only would the Crown revoke all claims to the lands of the newly formed United States, but would also cede the lands of British North America, bringing the Western American border to the Mississippi, along with zero payment in reparations to Great Britain, and the fishing rights in the waters of the future Dominion of Canada. The revolutionaries had won a war against one of the largest empires to have ever existed, and a sense of patriotism spread across the coast. After the American Revolution, the United States began its foreign diplomacy in Africa, first by gaining a rather advantageous friendship treaty with Morocco, which granted Americans pseudo-suzerainty over the nation and protection into the Mediterranean. However, even with this friendship treaty, American sailors still found their ships under attack. The American government was forced to pay tributes in order to free captured sailors, but as the American public grew critical of these payments, Thomas Jefferson began preparation for the First and Second Barbary Wars. Between the War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War, the United States' foreign diplomacy efforts pointed inwards, with the assimilation and conquest of Native Americans through horrendously unfair treaties. Treaties that, often, were forced upon tribal leaders who could hardly read English, with their only other option being total annihilation. The general opinion of the American public was positive, ignorant to the plight of the natives, with the famous piece titled American Progress being made describing the settling of the interior. Forcing westward, as Americans began settling Oregon country, James Monroe would be elected and would declare protection for all American countries against European powers, a declaration that would leave American countries open to the influence of the United States, an influence that is still deeply rooted in Latin American politics. As America grew to the west coast, Americans began to outnumber the Mexicans in Texas by 10-1. With northern Mexico unstable with rebellions, President James Polk seized the opportunity and annexed around 30% of the Mexican Empire's land through the Mexican-American War. These gains were solidified as an army marched on Mexico City. Conquering the continent, the American Empire marched into the sea, conquering islands through the mere declaration of the Guano Islands Act, and exerting influence on a kingdom between three empires, the Kingdom of Hawaii. With the British East India Company not far, French Polynesia growing closer, and the Americans' economic power tying it into the kingdom, the balancing act of independence was one that couldn't be sustained for long. Eventually, American settlers would destabilize the monarchy, ultimately overthrowing the Queen for economic power. Hawaii was annexed not long after. Today, Hawaiian culture has been assimilated into American culture, appropriated through iconography such as the lei, with the constant threat of encroachment on the remaining native land. Mastering the conquest of natives, America set sail for Cuba, where the first war against the European power that isn't Great Britain emerges with Spain, with the sinking of the USS Maine. At this point, conquest and manifest destiny finds fertile ground with the American public, and combined with the newspapers falsely claiming that the sinking was clearly intentional, support for the war was high. The Spanish-American War, dubbed a splendid little war, was over quickly, and saw the conquest of Cuba and the Philippines. During this time, and leading up to World War I, rapid industrialization would set the United States to become a great power, and eventually a superpower. World War I started as a European affair, but immediately the American public grew polarized regarding the war, with a split on whether to join the Central Powers under Germany or the Entente under Great Britain, or to remain totally neutral. The sinking of the Lusitania and other convoy raids by the German Navy quickly cemented American opinion in favor of entry into the war, and in 1917, the United States declared war on the Central Powers. During America's brief time in the war, President Woodrow Wilson declared, amongst other things, rights and self-determination to European nations and the establishment of an extra-governmental organization, a declaration that would set precedent for American judicialism over the affairs of European nations. However, after the war, America soon abandoned Wilson's 14 points, particularly with the delayed entry into the League of Nations and the abandonment of total self-determination, an abandonment that would set precedent for American exceptionalism, and exceptionalism to international law. World War II went much the same way for America, with a delayed entry solely based on an attack on America.
December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
However, leading up to the war, American opinion was less aligned towards Germany, with the two major opinions either being neutrality or to join the Allies. As the United States eventually swept across Europe, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin would meet in Yalta, a small village in Crimea. There, they would discuss the carving of Europe into zones of influence, placing nations into regimes based entirely on empire and economic interests. None of the nations affected would attend this conference, and the end of World War II would begin the Cold War, a period of extreme American nationalism as America rose to one of only two global superpowers. To end this video, perhaps it is best to view the United States in the modern world through the Cold War, specifically through the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, Americans discovered that Soviets were bringing nuclear-armed missiles to Cuba through the use of the U-2 spy plane. What resulted was a month-long crisis that brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation. However, just a year before, the United States staged a failed coup in Cuba and brought its own armed missiles to Italy and Turkey within striking distance of all Western Soviet cities. However, when America not only had their own missiles in the Soviets' backyard, but also attempted to throw a sovereign government, the American public had hardly reacted. It was also later revealed that the security advisors of President Kennedy believed that Cuba, being in possession of missiles, posed no security threat to American interests. So where does that leave us today? Well, America has been the undisputed sole world superpower since the Soviet Union fell in 1991. Though American culture is always looking for the next boogeyman to latch onto, the truth is, at least for now, we sit on top. We are that city on the hill. The question is, where do we go from here?